And you are now live.
So this is Senate Appropriations, and we're continuing our work on the 2020 budget. And we have Stephen Perkins with the Historical Society first. And we'll move to the Arts Council, Humanities Council, and the Vermont Symphony. So thank you, Steve, for being here. And if you want to give us your budget request, we would appreciate it. Let you take it from here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. So Stephen Perkins, I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Historical Society.
Would you like to go by Stephen or Steve?
I usually go by Steve, but you know, the full name is Stephen.
All right. Well, we discovered a colleague of ours 2 decades later preferred to go by Stephen, not Steve. So that's why we're sensitive. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. So just finished up touring your colleagues in the Institutions Committee around our facility here, which is quite enjoyable. So would definitely extend that opportunity to anyone on your committee if they would like to do so. But we're here to talk about the Vermont Historical Society's request appropriation. A little background. I know I haven't spoken to this committee, I think, in a couple of years now, but the Vermont Historical Society, I think, as you all know, is, for all intents and purposes, Vermont's state museum, and also one of the main research centers for the history of Vermont. We maintain the Vermont History Museum on the first floor of the pavilion next door to where you are now, and the Vermont History Center, which is our main library, research center, collection storage, and also houses the Vermont Archaeological Heritage Center, which is the Vermont Archaeological Collection, and the Vermont State Library in that building. So we are a quasi-state organization. We were chartered by the legislature in 1838 to do the mission that we still do today. And with that, we do receive an appropriation, where we have received an appropriation each year for the state of Vermont, and are very grateful for that. The other portion of our budget, basically half of our budget, is mostly raised privately or through earned revenue. So for us, the past 2 years have not been easy, I think, as it hasn't been for anybody. But we are certainly grateful for the continued support of the state of Vermont. We're certainly grateful for the federal dollars that have helped support our operations. And we have not had to lay off or reduce hours for any of our staff, which is great. And the staff have pivoted over the past couple of years to a real focus on access. And that was through digitization of archives, manuscripts, museum collections, moving programs online, providing virtual curriculum for schools, programs for schools, and out-of-school programs for children, all in a manner that met the requirements of the pandemic. I'm happy to say that we're returning to somewhat more normal operations at this point. And if I hadn't have given a tour to the Institutions Committee, I would have joined you in committee room today. So another project or another piece of what we've been doing over the past year or so, will continue in the very near future, is documenting Vermont's experience with the pandemic. We've created a Vermont digital archive for the pandemic. We are acquiring objects related to the pandemic. Probably not the most fun thing to remember, but it's very important that we do document that, as we did the 1918 flu pandemic. It became quite the resource for even national news in discussing those two things. So we hosted CBS Sunday Morning here a couple of weeks ago. Other portions of our operations, we do support 191 local historical societies spread around the state of Vermont. We do provide support. We can't tell them what to do, but we do have a full-time person that just provides services to those societies, and of course the rich collections that are throughout Vermont, whether they're small organizations or large organizations. We've been doing a lot around technology with them, helping them understand online cataloging to online programs and whatnot. And you can imagine that the learning curve was quite steep for many of those, and I'm quite proud of the work we've done with all of those groups. What we see coming up in the future, more of the same of that support, that technology, more of that digital access. We're working with many partners, including the State Library and the State Archives and a number of large repositories in Vermont to create a platform, a coherent platform to access the cultural material culture of the state all in one place. That's an ongoing project with private and federal support over for this year and into the next couple of years. We also look forward to doing more content and curriculum support for social studies programs throughout the state, responding to various directives in legislation around social studies content, as well as our belief that understanding of the past makes great citizens and a better future. So, and we feel that students can learn a lot about these pieces of their past and how to be good historians through Vermont history. And so obviously we advocate for that, and we have an employee whose job is just to support schools in that curriculum. So that's a very quick, I know it's 3:25, that's a very quick overview of operations to this point. Pressures, what are the pressures that we are seeing? Well, it may change in the next few months, but still right now, the inability to hold events, the inability to hold fundraising events, that has impacted us greatly up until this point. How do we continue to reach old audiences while building new audiences is a pressure. Regular, and I wrote down in my notes here, whatever that means, visitation. Going forward, it certainly is different and is changing. And then one of the biggest pressures on our organization is ongoing, and you've heard it from every state group, I think, that comes in here, is the ongoing pressure of state pension obligations, rising state pension obligations, benefit obligations, that sort of thing. The Vermont Historical Society is required by statute to treat all of our employees as if they were state employees. So they are afforded all pay and benefits of state employees, but that expense is shouldered exclusively by the Vermont Historical Society. And then the last piece is running two facilities. Pluses and minuses. It's wonderful to have a Vermont History Center here in Barre with all that we offer, but I think it's also important that there is a museum to our state's history in our state's capital. So we do run two facilities. So those are our pressures. We do support the number that is in the governor's budget, and we are happy that it is a 3% increase over last year, as it has been flat for a number of years leading up to that, which helps us with the pressures that I did mention. So with that, I'll stop and answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you. You said the institutions committee was visiting. Is there some request in the capital bill that they were, what's the basis of their visit?
It's specific to the state ARPA infrastructure money, so I'm not sure exactly how that interfaces. Yes, so there is an air handling piece to our operations here that it was included in the House bill, and Senate is considering that now. We did tour them through.
Questions? It's pretty straightforward. You can see it's listed the state appropriation, and there is an increase of almost 30,000. Anything?
I think, well,
yeah.
I just want to,
Senator,
it wasn't a question, I just wanted to say the pieces that you've been doing around the state that have been on television promoting the different sites, I think has been really good. I mean, there's a lot of them that you showed and did a little piece on that I didn't know existed, and I'm sure other people didn't either. So it's done very nicely to get people to go to those sites. And I'm also sorry that Bill Jenny is leaving the Coolidge site. He's been there forever and has done a great job. So anyway, I guess he's retiring like tomorrow or something.
He is indeed, and it's a big summer for Coolidge over the next couple. It's his 150th birthday this year, and then the following year's anniversary of well, we'll call it. They call it his ascension to the presidency, since he vice presidency to the presidency before an election. But anyway, they have a lot of things planned at the Coolidge site for that.
so some positive feedback. Senator Starr. You had a question?
Well, I was looking over your sheet, revenue, loss. Are you running a deficit or is that,
You're comparing 22 to 23,
Yeah.
with the 143,000.
yeah,
We're not running a deficit within the year, but so in 2022, just because of the way that the Paycheck Protection Plan monies were booked over a fiscal year, showed a surplus that was reinvested. So I would say it's an anomaly in the FY 2022 budget to see that $146,730 surplus, at a point in time as of June 30th. So we are showing for FY 2023 for next year. So that's this year. For next year, we're not showing a deficit. We're showing a $3,000 surplus.
yeah,
Other
33.
All
And
right.
2022 is not over yet either. That's just projected. That's budgeted, but based on, like I said, the way the federal money came in over the past 2 years, split fiscal years.
Thanks, Steve.
Great, thank you. We'll look forward to more of those specials, that Senator Nick has been watching.
We produce one every week,
Great, wonderful.
Really, one every week? Wow.
every Thursday.
Well, stay tuned, I guess. Thank you very much. Well, unless there are further questions of Steve, we're going to move to Karen Middlemen from the Arts Council. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you all for giving me this opportunity to come talk with you. If it's all right with you, since our core budget priority is so deeply related to the pandemic, I'd like to talk briefly about what we're seeing and hearing from the field when it comes to the impact of the pandemic, and then how, as the State Arts Agency, we're trying to respond to that, and then answer any questions you have about our budget. Does that make sense?
That's fun.
Okay, great. So as I said, our core priority looking ahead for fiscal 23 is to stabilize cultural organizations, creative businesses, and individual artists and get them safely through the recovery phase of the pandemic and whatever comes next. As I described in my memo to the committee, since the pandemic hit 2 years ago, our primary focus has been to address the urgent needs in the field, like the legislature, like most funders, like Vermont Humanities, our funding partner. We've kind of been in triage mode, receiving federal and state funds that we're incredibly grateful for and getting them out as quickly as we can to address urgent needs in the field. Along with our partners like Vermont Humanities and ACCD, we've been the conduit for more than $7 million in state, federal, and private COVID relief funds. Those funds went to 220 cultural organizations and 517 individual artists. And I hope that some of you have been inspired and amazed, as I have all during the pandemic, to watch the incredibly creative ways that our cultural organizations and artists have pivoted. I hate that word, but it's the perfect word in this case. They've had to reinvent themselves literally overnight. Organizations have just been incredibly resourceful. They've built e-commerce platforms from scratch, created brand new online content, staged outdoor events in parking lots and fairgrounds from hotel balconies and on top of moving vans. They sent home art projects for kids and families to do together. And in so many ways, they have helped us to combat pandemic isolation, kept us connected to each other and to a larger sense of community in truly extraordinary ways. But all of those, yeah.
I just note, one of the administrators thought, totally unrelated to the budget, about, you made direct grants to the Clements family and then the Abnaki, we call it, my son, as archaeologists would say, Abnaki. My question, and since Steve is still on, and I don't know, she's over 100 years old, a corn doll. And she has the most spectacular doll. It's made out of corn husk. Her hair is corn silk, and she has red tresses, a parasol. Is that, can you tell me, is that, and I think came from North Troy, where there was a large Abenaki population. Are you familiar, would anyone know the origin of this doll? She's well over 100, she's been over glass, but it's the most beautifully constructed, and the detail and her folds of her dress, and has a bonnet, and as I say, all out of all corn material. Is that anything you've seen in maybe continued in a tradition, or you might have, Steve, in the Historical Society collection?
I'd love to take a look at that. So, if you could send me photographs or even bring it over, we could compare it to pieces in our collection that have good provenance, where they're exactly from. And Jess Robinson, the state archaeologist, is also in our building and is an expert on Abenaki and late woodland, and could provide some resources for that.
Well, my son is a paleo-Indian archaeologist, but he's worthless when it comes to this particular.
Yep.
He's back in arrowheads and whatever. So it just seems like, I'm sure it's Vermont in origin because it came from one of the families and came from North Troy originally. And I suspect it might be something that was handcrafted here in Vermont. I know the Abenaki did a lot of crafts. They sold along Lake Champlain and so forth. I just don't know, but it would be nice to find out more about her. But she's very special. And
I might also suggest sending a photograph to Vera Sheehan, who's the director of the Abenaki Artists Association. And I don't know how much history of Abenaki art in Vermont she's connected to, but there might be someone in her artist network who has that knowledge. So if you want to share the photo with me, I can share it with Vera.
okay, well, I can, if I have my wits about me and can remember, I'll take a photograph of her. She's under glass, so she's been protected. Otherwise, I'm sure would have not fared as well. So, all right, well, thank you.
Maybe
I'd love to see her.
back to North Shore.
No, the doll isn't coming back to North Troy. She's staying in the family. All right, well, sorry, but I just read you, and it just triggered that thought, Karen, in terms of the grants that you've made to the Artists Association. I will tell you that Jody Freed is a constituent of mine, so don't worry, and as is Reeve Lindbergh. So I have two very active, high-profile advocates for the arts.
We miss Reeve. She's not on our board any longer, but she's still one of our big champions. So all of the online events and outdoor events that I was describing a moment ago that helped us to stay connected they were wonderful. They were extraordinarily creative, but not a single one of them made money for the arts organizations. Those online and outdoor events were lucky to break even. So I just want to stop for a moment and say the COVID relief grants that all of our cultural organizations received, thanks in large part to the legislature, were an absolute lifeline. So thank you. They made the difference between organizations surviving and just not being here today. The support for digital capacity building in our sector has also been especially critical. And I think that's even more evident now that museums and theaters are realizing that our online engagement is something that's here to stay. So your funding provided by the legislature has enabled us to provide free digital skills building for artists and organizations, and to partner with the Small Business Development Center to provide expertise on a whole range of issues related to delivering digital content. So thank you for that as well. What we're hearing now across the sector is that revenues are still down, in some places dramatically, and theaters and museums and community art centers that had just begun to find solid ground again last summer and fall faced a whole nother round of revenue losses due to Omicron. There's been a deluge of cancellations just in January and February. Many Vermont organizations are projecting gaps in their earned income in 2022 of 30 to 40% compared to pre-pandemic times. And that's consistent with the data that we're seeing on the national level on market potential across cultural organizations. We're not likely to get back up to close to 2019 pre-pandemic levels until the third or maybe the fourth quarter of 2022. So we have proposed a recovery package for the creative sector that was passed out of the House, H624, and it's now being considered in the Senate. I wanted to alert your committee to this bill.
We're aware of it.
Okay. It's an attempt to provide a bridge to help respond to this moment that we're in now. COVID is hopefully waning, but still causing enormous harm. And we're all building towards a time when we won't feel the impact of the pandemic again, when audiences come back fully, when museums and stagehands and exhibit designers are fully employed again. But we're simply not there yet. And I don't believe our communities will get there without investment now in the creative sector. So as I look forward to fiscal 23, and you'll see this reflected in my budget documents, our budget priorities remain the same as last year. We're focused almost exclusively on how can we help the creative sector to navigate the challenges of the pandemic and move forward. And so what that means is investing in individual artist grants that allow an individual artist to develop the skills and the financial strategies to put their creative businesses on firm footing and give cultural organizations the resources and expertise they need to weather this final stage of the pandemic and build resilience for the future. The main challenge that we face, besides our role as a funder, is that the perennial one that I've described to your committee in the past of how do we match the federal dollars that we receive from the National Endowment for the Arts. You know that we face a perennial funding shortfall every year because I've spoken to you about this in the past. We receive the majority of our revenue, 75 to 80%, from two sources, the National Endowment for the Arts and the state of Vermont. And the NEA, as you know, requires that state governments match the federal dollars, dollar for dollar. Our general fund allocation, therefore, allows us to secure substantial federal funds every year that we distribute to the field, to organizations, schools, and communities in all 14 counties. Based on our funding history with the NEA, we can tell you with reasonable certainty that our federal allocation will increase in fiscal 23. If you look at our budget, we have put the NEA in at level funding, the same amount as this year. But we know that Congress has just passed a budget with a substantial increase for both of the federal cultural agencies. And so we're going to get a bump up. The problem is the NEA doesn't announce that allocation to each of the state arts agencies until late March or early April. So this presents us with a perennial funding shortfall that we have to meet with state funds in order to secure full federal funding. So we're thrilled with the 3% increase.
Is it a dollar for dollar match?
It's a dollar for dollar match, and it must come from the general fund. So we can't count ARPA funds, for example. We couldn't count CARES Act funds. We can't count funds from the capital budget that support, as you know, some of our public art programs. So it must come from the general fund. It must be dollar for dollar match. So that's, in a nutshell,
you're already short, Tom.
Yes, I am. I'm short every year.
You had 807,000 of the national endowment, and your state general is only 744.
We projected state funds as the administration guidance told us to, which is to project a 3% increase. So you're absolutely right. We're facing, even if we get level funding from the NEA, which is unlikely, we're facing a shortfall of more than $63,000. And we're likely to see an increase that will make that shortfall closer to 100,000. And if that's not matched with state funds, that means it's $200,000 that doesn't go out to serve the field. So that's our perennial issue. And I imagine that will be coming. I'm so sorry, I can't hear you.
No, I said we've experienced that matching requirement before. Thank you.
So that's our funding picture. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
On the back sheet, then your proposed budget, you've got additional general fund appropriation that maybe it just turns out to be the same way. The 63,121, that's a different 63.
That was a one-time appropriation last fiscal year that allowed us to match the federal funds. That was a one-time add-in late in the budget process. That each year, as you know, your committee or other committees have helped us with a kind of Band-Aid solution to meet our funding shortfall.
All right, so that's what we did to deal with it this current fiscal year. Other questions, Karen? All right, I will put that on our list. Thank you.
Did she say what the NEA was going to be?
She said to match it would require another 63, and it could be as much as 100,000, based on what they're hearing in terms of additional money on the federal side. Is that correct? Did I hear you correctly, Karen?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. All right, well, we're keeping a list. Getting longer, but we will do the best we can to keep track, and maybe as we get further along, you'll have more information as well in terms of what would be the match requirements if we are able to draw down the full amount. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I see we have Christopher here from the Humanities Council, and we have a document. So welcome, thank you for being with us this afternoon. Do you prefer Christopher or Chris? And you're muted.
Christopher, please. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. My husband is Chris, so people get us confused fairly frequently.
Well, Christopher, all right.
Christopher. So, thanks for having us in. And I just want to echo and support everything that Stephen and Karen have said before me, and note, as Karen said several times, that the Arts Council has been the funding partner for all of the ARPA funding, and prior to that, the CARES funding that we put out to the cultural sector in Vermont. And we really, I can't imagine a better partner to have in this process. And it really made our ability to support the sector much stronger, to be able to collaborate with Karen and her team over at the Arts Council. So I just want to offer those thanks, and also support Karen's work on H624, as well as the other work that she continues to do that supports the whole cultural field, both arts and humanities organizations all across Vermont. As you all know, we were founded in 1974, so we're coming up on our 50th anniversary. We are the Vermont affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, as they are the affiliate of the National Endowment for the Arts. However, you all are less on the hook with us, as the congressional statute with NEH does not mandate a one-for-one match with state dollars for the humanities grants. They do mandate a one-for-one match, but we can make that match happen with any dollar that we raise, both philanthropic dollars as well as state dollars. So the contribution that the state makes goes a long way towards helping us make that match, and we make up the rest of it with privately raised dollars from individual Vermonters and foundations across the state. Last year, we had just about 700 gifts from around Vermont that helped us make up that match. As I said, we work in close partnership with the Vermont Arts Council, increasingly in close partnership with the Vermont Department of Libraries, as well as other state agencies, including the Vermont State Parks, and this year the Vermont Secretary of State's office, where we're producing a new comic book resource on democracy in Vermont that should be available this summer. As we continue through the pandemic, we set 3 straightforward goals for the year. They're in the packet that I gave to you: provide leadership for the cultural sector, create new and innovative ways to present high quality COVID-safe programming, and keep the scholars, humanists, trainers, and staff working to promote the public humanities in Vermont. We've generally been, I think, very successful with meeting those goals over the course of the 2 years of the pandemic and now into 2022. As Karen mentioned, our ARPA grants were made in all 14 counties, 146 grants. The average grant size was over $8,000. And we provided additional support for BIPOC-led organizations or LGBTQ organizations in Vermont that might need a little bit of an extra boost. We also run a fair amount of our own programming, so I wanted to tell you just a little bit about that. Our Vermont Reads One Book Community Read Project in 2021 through June was The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. There were 79 community projects across the state, and the Zoom visit by Angie was seen by over 2,400 people, including 2,000 students in just about every middle and high school in the state of Vermont. It was a partnership with the Vermont Library Association, Vermont School Libraries Association, and the Vermont State Library to make that happen. We're now working on We Contain Multitudes by Sarah Henstra. She's coming to Vermont in 2 weeks' time to do a live in-person residency across the state. She'll do a Zoom project for high schools and middle schools around Vermont, but she'll also visit both Hazen and Hardwick and Rutland High School down in Rutland County, as well as doing a couple of public events, one in Essex and one in Middlebury. Our fall conference last year was on the humanities and climate change. There were 10 sessions, 9 were on Zoom, 1 was live. Overall, it was attended by over 1,000 Vermonters, and we created curricular extension resources to make many of the recordings of the presentations evergreen and usable into the future. That was a partnership with our University of Vermont's Office of Engagement, as well as the UVM Lane series. We try really, really hard to do nothing alone, but everything in partnership in this day and age. We support the state's goals on diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. The humanities, of course, build empathy, understanding, and trust across communities. We use multiple modalities at many developmental stages, from the earliest little ones learning to read through adulthood. Our program is contributing to economic development in Vermont, as you hear often when we're talking about H624 and the need to continue to support cultural organizations around the state. Just a couple of examples from our own programming. Humanities camps provide summer support for parents and children so that parents have a safe place for their kids to go while they're at work. Our early education trainings are helping educators of young children to earn a livable wage. There are plenty of other examples that I could give you or that you could see in the package as well. Coming up in 2022, in the budget that we've submitted to you, we're increasing our regular grant making to at least $175,000 or more for FY22. That's a huge increase from when I first started in the position about 3.5 years ago, when we were granting about $50,000 a year. We've worked with the Vermont Department of Libraries to relaunch the Vermont Early Literacy Initiative with 10 public libraries working in lower income communities around Vermont. We're continuing the Words in the Woods program with Vermont State Parks, which will bring eminent Vermont poets into Vermont State Parks to do public events throughout the summer. One change in our early literacy work this year that I think is important to mention is that we are now providing honoraria to each of the teachers who take our trainings, so that they are getting paid for their professional development time in the same way that many of the rest of us in professional fields get paid for our own professional development time. Finally, I want to note that our new Vermont Reads project will be announced on April 30th, and it will launch a year-long series of programs on land use, agriculture policy, and migrant farm workers in the state of Vermont that I hope you'll follow as we go through the year. The book will be announced at the Vermont Book Awards on April 30th. We'll make sure that you all get invitations to the event and can come and celebrate Vermont writers publishers and booksellers with us. We'll continue to support our community partners over the next year with some of the COVID adaptations that we've created over the last 2 years. We're keeping our sliding scale program fees. We're providing technical assistance on a regular basis, often in collaboration with the Arts Council. And we're supporting, again, the Vermont Creative Futures Act, H624, which will help these cultural organizations continue to adapt to and come out of the pandemic in a way that really helps them to thrive. I'm going to stop there, and I'm happy to take questions. If you want to look at the packet, the one-page budget is on the last page. If you have any questions about the budget, I'm happy to answer them, or about any of our programming. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I think it's a good summary, and your budget's quite straightforward. So other comments or questions of Christopher? It's also nice to see how resources that might get appropriated to one entity, in fact, are, by working together, you're really achieving multiple goals, as opposed to this is my money and this is what it does. So, which is often has in the past has often been the case. So it's really great to hear about how you've been working together toward a common goal and for the benefit of Vermont. So thank you on that.
You're welcome. It's part of our theory of change to spread the love.
Well, we could use quite a bit more of that.
Is that a 3%?
Yes. Well, I don't know.
Is your budget a 3% increase, Christopher?
Yeah, it is a 3% increase in line with what the governor expected and what I believe passed the House a couple days ago. You know, obviously we face the same pressures that Steve and Karen do to a greater or lesser degree, especially around things like healthcare and other benefits that continue to rise.
But like the Historical Society, where the employees are treated as state employees, is that true for, I don't know what your staffing is, Chris?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Interestingly, no, we're all treated somewhat differently. And I don't know why that is or how that developed over the years.
Because of the origins, and I think because one has the federal, maybe it was the federal legislation that was the genesis, as opposed to the Historical Society, which if I go back to the document that was chartered in 1838. So that's quite a long-standing
That's true.
specific connection.
One thing we did do this year in terms of the kind of expanding our benefits for staff is we added a short-term disability policy for the first time. You know, the COVID pandemic really taught us through some specific and painful examples of how important it is to have short-term disability for our employees, and we'd never had it before. So that's a new add-on for this year.
Thank you. So now we're going to move to the Vermont Symphony.
Right. And with apologies, I want to just say I love the Vermont Symphony. I have a meeting that I have to go to. Otherwise, I would stay and cheer on Elise, who, you know, it's an amazing organization, and I urge you to support their request fully.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Christopher.
Thank you.
So, Elise, we're now to the Vermont Symphony, and we have your document here in terms of sort of a summary in 2020 and what's happened since then. The world certainly changed a lot. So if you would like to just sort of bring us up to date on what is happening, as well as the budgetary request, which is pretty straightforward in terms of the state appropriation.
Great. Thanks very much. My name is Elise Spurnell, and I joined the VSO a year and a half ago. So still a little bit new, but I think I've got my feet pretty wet here, and really thrilled to be working with this organization, and it's great to present to you. So we are in our 87th season, and I'm going to back up what Karen said. It's been just really through the support of COVID relief grants that keeps our doors open and keeps us active, specifically because we've been unable to earn the income we normally would over the last 2 years. It's slowly getting better, but that's been something that's allowed us to stay active. I'd like to draw your attention to just a couple of things we've been doing recently since I submitted the budget request, talking about a few things. We have education programs. For example, we bring our musicians in schools to schools throughout the state. We've been recently, within the last week, up in Lakeview and Wolcott and Woodbury, allowed finally to get back into schools and work with kids, showing them what the strings and brass and woodwinds are all about, and tying that together with a storyline that combines STEM education with music. We've also been able to do a young composers program residencies in St. Albans and now in Brattleboro, where we work with right now Brattleboro Union High School kids to teach them how to write music for instruments, and then we have a concert of that music. Another kind of educational program we've had recently is our Jukebox String Quartet, where we brought in young string players to come and play alongside our professional musicians in concerts. We were back in Bennington recently and a couple of other communities. So that's been really fantastic to be back in schools, working with them, and also to be working with young musicians to have them partner with ours throughout the state. In addition, we've had some community outreach programs, most recently the Midwinter Music Festival, where we toured to 7 senior home and senior residence communities, Hardwick, Montpelier, St. Albans, and a few others, and presented free concerts of string music and reading Vermont poetry. So it was a back and forth between poets from Vermont and our music. So that was a good way to keep people keep music in their lives, especially for communities that haven't been able to get out as much. As far as our concerts go, I'm really excited that we've just announced our season coming up. We've got 34 concerts statewide next year, and just to be able to do that is phenomenal. 17 of those are the large-scale orchestra, and the other half are the smaller ones. It's a mix of everyone's favorites, the big summer holiday pops concerts that go around the state. I think everyone generally, at some point in their lives, has gotten a picnic basket, hopefully, and come to a VSO summer concert. So we have that and our holiday pops concert. But we also have some new initiatives where we are working with a whole series of Vermont short films, animated shorts and documentary shorts, and doing live orchestral accompaniment to those. That's going around to 4 different communities this coming year. We're doing a partnership with the Vermont Youth Orchestra, also working with kids at Champlain College who are in graphic design and video projection to do a whole youth education video projection and concert with them. We'll be back at Farmers Night in Montpelier. Finally, I think it's been 3 years, but we're going to be back there in the State House. And then we also have our Jukebox String Quartet that travels throughout the state. Alongside this, we have 4 new world commissions coming next year. 2 of them written by Vermonters and 1 written by a Grammy Award-winning composer. So I think one of the key things is to be able to present music that is exciting and new, tied to our Vermont roots, but also bringing in people from around the world and presenting our orchestral musicians with new and known music. So our doors are open. We do have the challenge of not knowing about earned income. I think that's the hardest thing, because you just literally do not know sometimes until the day before if people will come. And part of my proposal has been the 3%, which we're incredibly grateful for. And, the state appropriation is a financial backbone to our budget. In addition to that, I had requested initially in September an additional $40,000 that would allow us to continue recording and streaming our concerts. More than anything, that has allowed us to bring music into the homes of the people who could either not afford the ticket, don't have transportation to attend something, or just due to the COVID pandemic are unable to come to live music. Last appropriation, we had been given an unsolicited and very generous $25,000 supplement that we used for that. And so I've asked for an additional 40 to allow us to continue doing that in the coming year.
Let me
That-
ask, that additional request, did the House have budget?
The House did not approve it, but I was advised by Representative Tristan Tulano that I could certainly put it forward to the Senate, and if that was something that the Senate Appropriations felt was important, to communicate that back to them in case their minds changed. But I put it out there as something that is a wonderful thing. It costs money to record and stream and to market that. And that's where we're at. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I'm open it up. Committee, do you have any questions? The 181 is what the governor proposed, and if I understand Lisa's, what they had requested was an additional one-time of 40,000, which the House was not able to include. It's obvious the requests far exceed what we have for money, and so but we will consider anew. We're keeping a list, and we will look at what we have for funding. So I believe the $181,087 is what the governor has proposed in his budget, and we would like an additional 40,000.
Sorry, just to be clear, the 181 is inclusive of the 40. So if it was going to be excluded, it would be 141,000.
Oh, okay. Well, that's what I was trying to clarify.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. If it is stays at 3% and no more, then the total is 141,000.
Okay.
It would go up to 181 if that extra 40 or whatever amount the Senate feels that this is valuable, but that is more than affordable. It's
Okay. So the governor proposed a 3%, and that was how much again?
141.
141. Okay.
And what about your NEA grant? Do you have to do a match on yours? Like, no?
No, we don't have that. That's just a straight up application to the NEA.
It's weird. One group has to match it dollar for
Well, a
dollar.
lot of it comes, yeah, what's different, what the grant conditions are.
Yeah. And Karen could correct me, but the Arts Council is a state agency that is in each state has that agency, whereas we're not defined the same way as an orchestra.
Senator Byrd?
I'm just wondering about the Shuttered Venues Operator Grant. Can you just give me a little more information? Was that a one-time, 1 year thing, or does it spread over multiple years?
Yep, one time, one thing grant, COVID relief grant that was specifically around, it was around theaters and entertainment, shuttered venues, and it expanded a bit to organizations such as ours that use those venues and operate within arts and culture. But it is finished now.
All right, thank you.
Karen, I'm not sure if you want to add anything to that with your knowledge of it. Sorry.
I was just going to add, there were the Shuttered Venues program that Elise is referring to those were federal funds given out through the Small Business Administration. There were a total of about 50 performing arts venues across Vermont, nonprofit venues that received those grants.
Yeah, and I had heard about those. I was just wondering if it was money that could be spent over multiple budgets. But
Other questions of our witnesses? Thank you for coming today, and appreciate your testimony, and also sort of an update on what you have planned as we hopefully emerge out of our COVID environment. So look forward to the work ahead. Thank you very much for coming today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So we have concluded our testimony for today. So I'm going to adjourn the committee and go off live.